Well, it is wonderful to welcome you here again today. And we're going to be talking a little bit this morning about some of the things you saw in the video. Especially the part that says, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And maybe this morning you would like to stand at the end of the service. We're going to have some time set aside for you to do just that. Maybe there's a son or a daughter here, and you've never maybe done this in public with them around. Maybe they're here in the service today, and you would just like to stand and say, "Hello, my name is. This is my son or my daughters, or whatever the case may be, and here's why I'm proud of them." And then just sit back down. And we don't have to go elaborate too much on it. We can just share it, kind of like just popcorn it from throughout the congregation, and we just pop up and share a few thoughts like that and just sit back down. We'll just hear it from different ones. And not every dad may do this today, but maybe there's some of you here who feel compelled to do that today. And so we just want to give you that opportunity. Chapter 23, installment of the story, Jesus' ministry begins. And so what we're going to do is I want to look at the baptism account that Mark's gospel gives to us. And I think it's very intriguing what we read there. And what you're going to find is, just like Robbie talked about just a few minutes ago, and just like the video and in your reading that you've done, you're going to see that Christ comes between those whom He loves and the spiritual darkness that seems to be pressing in on every hand. And so the question is, how are the children? That's the question that Robbie presented, and that's a question really that Christ has to answer, and He answers it very well in terms of taking care of the children of the world. And so we see in chapter 23, Jesus' ministry begins, and there are some YouVersion resources that are available. If you've got a smartphone, you can access some of those. You want to track with me today, you feel free to do that. But we take a little closer look, and when we see what God the Father gives to God the Son in this account, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. 3 gifts that God the Father bestows upon God the Son, and the Spirit is also in attendance and is present at the baptism of Jesus. And so you have this Trinitarian blessing where God is breaking in. Now we have to keep in mind, like last week, we noted that Jesus, His birth and some of the things via the video that happened at the time of His birth. We've looked at the 12th year of life of Jesus, and we took a closer look at some of the experiences that He had in and around Jerusalem. And then for 18 years after the life of Jesus and his temple episode, after that 18 years, these are silent years where we don't know much about what happened in the life of the Savior. Of course, He's self-limited in His humanity, and yet He's getting to know the Father in those years. And so these are Nazarene, anonymous years where God's got Him tucked away, and He's mentoring, and He's meeting with, and He's discipling, and He's working with His Son. And His Son, with a hand of deity tied behind His back, and yet fully God and fully man, fully God, He sets aside the independent use of His deity. He submits as a human being ought to submit to God the Father, and that's a wonderful relationship that plays out. And so we have the birth of Jesus, we have the 12th year of life, Jesus in the temple episode, typical 12-year-old boy, and then we have these 18 silent years. And the question that we all have when we're working our way through the story is God the Father pleased with the progress of His Son? Is God the Spirit at home in His life? What is heaven's verdict on this guy we're coming to know as Jesus the Messiah, the Savior of the world? And so the baptism is an announcement. It is a proclamation. It is a coronation of sorts. That, you know what? Not only the last 18 years, But the last 30 some odd years, the way that this guy has lived his life, he's lived in relative anonymity for this period of time. No one's been applauding his life. No one has been observing his life up close and personally. He's just been living a common, ordinary existence as a carpenter all those years. And finally, after many, many years of silence, there's a great word, a great revelation that the Trinity gives on those undocumented chapters of the life of Jesus. And so those years of anonymous living are over, and the time to introduce and offer the kingdom has come. And so Jesus is saying goodbye to the carpenter years of anonymity, and He's not necessarily looking to promote Himself. He's looking to promote the agenda of God the Father for the world and to accomplish His mission of invasion. A planet is being invaded with something great, extraordinary. If we go to slide number 4, in Mark chapter 1, you'll see it. At that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Verse 10, just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, He saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on Him like a dove. And so as He comes up out of the water, a kind of coronation takes place, and there's a visual aspect and there's an audible aspect of this. And bear in mind now, you remember from previous installments of the story, God hasn't spoken for 400 years. Of course, there's been a divine silence in that period of time, but we know after this 400-year period of time, there's the visitation to Zacharias and Elizabeth. There's the visitation, angelic visitation to Joseph and Mary. But none of that was public. These were private episodes where God shows up, lets these chosen people know, hey, these parents know, hey, you're going to be raising a very special boy in your womb. You're going to be raising some special boys, and they're going to do something great for the world. But there was not a public word. And now, in a public setting, after 430 some odd years of silence, Mark uses a verb that Matthew and Luke do not use. And the verb, and I'm not just being picky here, I think it's important we understand that he chose a verb. It's the Greek verb schizo, which means to rip. It's of the heavens. In fact, let's do that again. Take out your bulletins. Go ahead, get your bulletin. Let's do it again. Let's add some sound effects. Okay, so 430 years, 400 silent years, God speaks in visions. At the time of Jesus' birth, He shows up again at 12 years of age. And now for 18 more years, there's no word, no public revelation from God. And now, after all of these years of silence, on the count of 3, take that bulletin and just rip it, okay? And I want you to listen to the sound effect. And that's kind of what was heard, was a sizzling, a ripping of the heavens. 1, 2, 3, rip it. Wow. You always want to do that to your bulletin, I know it. There's a ripping, a schizo. It's a dramatic opening of the heavens. And the only time that we see this particular word used is in the temple in reference to the veil that was ripped from top to bottom at the time of Jesus' death on the cross. And I think Mark, the writer, knows about Isaiah the prophet. Slide number 5. Isaiah the prophet in Isaiah 64:1. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, that the mountains would tremble before you. It's a cry for God to break the silence, to do something dramatic, to break into the world of human history and do something great. And so finally, in reference to the Isaianic hope in the Old Testament, Mark is trying to amplify and beautify and to somehow underscore and emphasize and highlight and bold and italicize, world, get ready, something great has arrived. And the heavens split. Sometimes we talk about wormholes into other dimensions. This seems to be an opening up of a dimension that we normally cannot see. Movies and fictional books are all obsessed with this thin place between the world of our world of our five senses and the world that we cannot take in. We don't have the necessary apparatus to comprehend and see in that other world with our normal five senses. And yet these parallel universes exist, and in this place it's as if that there's a wormhole into another dimension, and God, there's a ripping open of the heavens. And when we see the Isaiah promise, and when we see the dramatic effect of a heavens ripping open, a dimension opening up, you might be tempted to think that something violent is going to happen, that something is going to come crashing down. But it's a contrast to what you expect. Instead of this crashing, violent judgment opening up from another dimension and invading this one, we have not thunder necessarily or earthquakes necessarily on this occasion, but what we have is a gentle dove. A dove is a bird known for its gentleness and its sweetness. You know, football teams sometimes use birds as emblems or mascots, and they show their power and ability. I mean, we've got the Falcons, we've got the Eagles, we've even got the Ducks. But did you ever hear a team called the Doves? I play for the Doves. Does that sound intimidating to anybody? No, we don't usually call someone or have a dove as our mascot, because doves aren't typically associated with power. They're gentle birds. And how does a dove descend? Does he come soaring in a predatorial nosedive to grab his prey and destroy it? No, a dove doesn't come into a predatorial nosedive. He's the gentlest, and she is the gentlest of birds. They come down lightly, delicately. They flutter in its place to its place of rest. And so when these heavens rip, they rip. And we brace ourselves for what's coming next. Wonder of wonders. The Spirit comes down, and rather than yelling at us and reprimanding us and letting us know what an incarnational inconvenience this problem of human sin has presented to the person of the 3-in-1 Trinitarian God, God breaks in. Those 430 years. And instead of an explosion, there's a gentle flutter that says, I got this. Maybe you came to church today thinking maybe in just another preacher is going to give just another message where he's going to condemn us all and send us home. But maybe the gentle flutter of His Spirit wants to tell you today, you're my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. If you'll love me, follow me, trust me, I'll help you to be the dad you've always wanted to be. The mom you've always wanted to be. And so when these heavens rip, we expect the worst. But instead what we got was the gentle Jesus, who says, will you just let me in your life? Well, So the visual is powerful in the dove coming down. And on slide number 4, we see the audible. And a voice came from heaven. Not only was there a visual aid, but there was an audio aid. A voice came from heaven. You are my son. You are my son. Yeah, other people may hear this, but I'm going to talk to you right now. I want you to know you're my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased. And maybe today, in your comments, you just want to look at your boy. You want to look at your daughter in the assembly of the people and say, I know I'm supposed to say something I love about you, but I just want to look at you and tell you I love you, and here's why. Maybe that's what you're being called to do today. You know, the entire Trinity is present, and God breaks into human history, and He does something great, and at once the Spirit sent Him out into the wilderness. Verse 12, and He was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by Satan. He was with the wild animals, and angels attended to Him. And Mark doesn't tell us what Matthew and Luke tell us, and that is that Jesus went without food for the entire 40 days. Matthew 4:2, Luke 4:2, He didn't eat for 40 days. And so once again, God stacks the odds against Himself. He has a self-limited hand of deity tied behind His back. He's living in a human body with an empty belly in an isolated place. Even hungrier animals are on the prowl. And I've seen the wilderness and desert places of Israel, and they're very, very abandoned. And water sources are sometimes hard to come by. And you've got the person of Satan buzzing around trying to inflict an early sting on the ministry of the Savior. And yet our warrior king, He goes from His baptism, a highlight of His life, when the Trinity is present and God is breaking in, and the gentle dove and the ripping of the heavens, and He doesn't get to enjoy that more than just a few minutes, it seems. That's the way it is many times in great spiritual victories. You have these great breakthroughs in your life, and I'll be daggone if right on the heels of that many times there is a great encounter with Satan. And if you choose to follow Christ today, I guarantee you before you get home, in the car even, there'll be challenges to the great spiritual steps that you've tried to take today. Because that's the way the enemy works in our lives. And that's the way he worked in the life of the Savior. But Jesus, under the inspiration of the Spirit, the third person of the Trinity, He is driven into the wilderness. It's as if He's going to go meet Satan on Satan's terms. And He's going to meet Satan on Satan's turf. And our warrior king takes on the realm of darkness right in the early beginning stages of His public ministry. He's got the Spirit of God within Him. He's got the love of a Father over His life. And that's all that He needs in order to have the spiritual victory He's endeavoring to accomplish for the world. And yet Satan is very real to come into his life. And he whispers, you don't have to do that cross thing, You can be a king of the world right now if you'll worship me. And think about it. He's doing this on an empty stomach. Don't you get grouchy when your stomach gets a little empty? I tell you what, men love to eat. And when that belly is empty, there's not a whole lot else that matters in the world than getting something in the belly. All right? Here Jesus, in His humanity, empty belly, all alone in the wilderness with a demonic presence that says you don't have to do the cross saying. The baptism was good. Ripping of the heavens is great. It's wonderful. But hey, let's do this a different way. Be sensational. Turn stones to bread. You'll be the best circus in town. You'll have all the women you'd ever want, and you don't have to listen to a heavenly Father. We're on our own down here, Jesus. We're on our own down here, and I'm the only one that had the audacity just to flip God the Father off and say, you know what, I'm going to do my own show. You don't have to do it this way. Nobody else has the gumption to challenge divine authority. I'm a free spirit. I'm an independent thinker, and all those in my school of thought are really the ones that are free here on this planet. And Jesus battled and battled and battled in the wilderness on those kinds of issues. And the only thing he could do was quote Scripture. He fell back on his training. You know, I had a kind of a wilderness experience not too long ago. I was in a wilderness place back in April. It wasn't 40 days, but it was about 4 hours and 44 minutes. And that's how long it took me to run from Kalamazoo, Michigan to South Haven, Michigan. Yes, I'm a nut. I understand that. But for 33.5 miles, I never stopped moving. I never was so glad to see civilization in all my life. It was wonderful. And when you see people that kiss the ground after they come back from across the sea or something like that, I have a new appreciation for those who go through these kinds of experiences and they finally get to come home. And you know, it was kind of like a microcosm of life. You know, there's a starting line and there's a finish line, and there's a lot of rough patches in between those two things. But I couldn't have done it without the help of so many. Donette drove me up, and it was icy, really icy weather that morning, and I wasn't sure we were going to make it. She got us there, and about 15 minutes before the thing started, and there's no place to park, and so she handled the vehicle in the crowded parking lot while I went and got a number and all those things squared away. And there was a map that you had, and you can kind of go from bunny hop from aid station to aid station. So if I needed something, she was kind of there to help me through it. And it's called the Calhaven Trail, and it's ordinarily a bicycle trail. And it's a limestone surface. And so typically people ride out from Kalamazoo to South Haven, have lunch, and ride back. Well, they have a race there. Or it's a run, it's a trail run for 33.5 miles. And I said, honey, at mile 18 or 19, I always start craving real food. I want something with substance. Gels don't do it. Chews don't do it. Peanut butter M&Ms don't do it. Gatorade can't cut it. And I don't know if you can find a hamburger at 8 in the morning, but if you can find one, I'm game. I'll sign up for one. Give me half of whatever you can find. So at Bloomingdale, about 18, 19 miles in, she's there, and she's got this thing extended, and it's not a hamburger, but it's egg, bacon, and cheese sandwich. And I had egg all over my glasses. I was trying to choke that down and breathe at the same time. It's a task, but I had it all over me, trying to get that in me. And I wouldn't stop at these aid stations because I was afraid I wouldn't get started again. And so I wouldn't stop, but when I got past mile 26, I started telling everybody at the aid stations, just tell me I can make it. Just tell me I can make it. Because I was starting to doubt it. Tell me I can make it. And these guys that didn't even know me, big grin on their face. You can make it, number whatever you are. You can make it. You can make it. And so every time I would see these stations, tell me I can make it. I ran in the snow for much of the way. And so I was fighting leg cramps for the final 8 miles. And I just about bit it twice in a huge mud hole that had thawed. And I couldn't feel my feet for the last 6 or 7 miles. At about mile 30 or 31, I had this overwhelming desire just to go over here and lay down and just forget the world's problems. Just forget everything, because that's what really sounded good to me, was just go and lay down. I started quoting stuff. I started quoting Jesus on the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? I was quoting Jeremiah the prophet. Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me? I was quoting my mantra verse in Psalm 18:29. For by you I can run against a troop, and by my God I can leap over a wall. And I'm thinking, yeah, right. Okay, if I can just get left in front of right, right in front of left, left in front, back and forth. If I could get that done, I'm happy. Forget the wall. Okay, I hit a lot of walls, all right? But if I could just get one foot in front of the other. I even quoted Lord of the Rings. Yes, with Frodo and Sam, they pictured themselves being at home, eating strawberries and cream in the hazel thicket. And sometimes when you feel spent and you have nothing left to give, you feel vulnerable and alone. You're working on some rural mile that seems continents away from a finish line. And your mind is being messed with. And the presence of God seems so far away. And there's something that you need to be able to pull from in those times to give you the sense of reorient your sense of direction and purpose and why you're there. You know, when I got to the end of that thing, I remember something someone had told me one time. If you ever do an ultra like that, you're going to feel loopy. And they're right. It's true, because Donette was telling me where to go and I couldn't quite figure it out. She'd point things out and say, this is where, and it's like, okay. I just couldn't quite grasp what she was telling me to do and where she was telling me to go. And then I started chilling, and so she, and I could hardly walk, but she kind of guided me to the tent. I got some water, and I got some other things in me, some clementines and things, and then she took me to the van, and I laid down in the van, and Donette and the dog went somewhere else to do something, and I got in the van, and I remember I cried like a baby. Just cried like a baby. And Will wanted to know why I did that. And I thought about that. And besides the fact that everything hurt, literally, everything hurt, even my teeth hurt, I think there are several things, and they kind of have given me insight into this whole story of Jesus in the wilderness. I think one of the things that I felt crying like a baby in my van was I had to say goodbye to the vestiges of youth. I had to say goodbye to the vestiges of youth. Translated, you're not young anymore, buddy. You're not young anymore. I think Jesus in the wilderness was saying goodbye to those Nazarene Anonymous years. I think he was saying goodbye to life as he knew it for 30 some odd years. And he had to come to a place in his life, okay, there's a pivot. I got to transition from this mode of existence to another mode of existence. I've got to begin to accomplish what God put me on this planet to do for the world. And so you have to say goodbye to some things sometimes. And I know it was kind of embarrassing. Here's Mr. Tough Guy who just ran 33.5 miles, and I can't even walk without assistance. And there's some 30-year-olds there. They're tired, but they're not crippled up like I was. I was just a cripple, humbled by my inability to do anything else. It was just nuts. I think another reason I cried in that van was I think that it had been a long preparation journey of running, in some cases, blizzard conditions for 9 months. And just to try to stay healthy for that long and not be the best conditioned guy on the sidelines cheering was a big emotional release. Just to have come to a place where it's like, oh, the mission, there's accomplishment of the mission. I think Jesus had been prepared for 30 some odd years. He's ready. He's ready for this next life season. And then I think another thing, I needed to face a challenge of endurance and overcome it. Some people ask me why I've kind of started running in my life. And of course, when we had kids at home, that was the big priority, and that's what you got to do. We heard it today. I set everything aside when our kids were at home and investing in them, and I just couldn't feel like I could do anything on a regular basis. But with a kind of a new life direction in terms of a schedule things and changes, it's kind of put me in a position maybe to explore some different things, and so it's become my wilderness. It's kind of where I go, and I see the demonic in my own life. I see the demons after my own tail and on my own trail and on my own heels. And not only that, but it's times when I think that I sense the presence of God in ways that maybe I haven't felt Him before. And even to this day, on a long, long run, I still reminded of Jesus on the cross when He did say, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's joy in it, but there's also a lot of pain in it. And somehow in those moments, I feel strangely close to Him. Satan's been tripping me up a long time, in one way or another. And I think when I crossed that finish line, it felt like the heavens opened and the Spirit gently descended, and there was an energy to live a God-honoring life for the second half. To put Him first more than I've ever put Him first before. To listen to the gentleness of the Spirit in ways maybe I've not listened to Him before. It's almost as if there was a thin place in the back of that van. And coming out of the wilderness, Jesus had a new focus in ministry. And that's what He wants to give us today. You know, as I look at a little more closely, as we transition here, I look a little more closely to what happens here. I think probably one of the greatest spiritual warfare weapons that you can receive in the arsenal of the redeemed is a good Father. 3 valuable blessings were bestowed on Jesus from His dad. 3 great gifts that will shape them for life, that will shape you and me for life. On slide number 4, we read, God communicated belonging, you are my son. And it feels great when you show up at home and they let you in. Isn't that a great feeling? And sometimes, you know, you wonder, have I really overdone it this time? Are they going to open the door and let me inside? Well, God communicated belonging. You're my son. He needed the reaffirmation that he belonged to God, and so does your son or daughter. And notice what we see here. Don't overlook the obvious. They are words. Your sons, your daughters need your words. They convey importance and protection and comfort and tenderness and caring. One time my dad bragged on me. And in public. And I never forgot it. And it really meant a lot to me. Because I was just a young teenager. Not sure who I was yet or who I belonged to necessarily. And what was my mission in life. But he bragged on me in front of other people. Sometimes you know how dads will do. You go to the barber shop and they'll put you up for sale at an auction block. You know, they're going to bid you off. All the guys there waiting to get a haircut. Sometimes it's just good fun. All right, when your kids are little and they got those burr haircuts and you just kind of kid around and things. But there's those little boys, those little girls, when you commend them in public places in front of others, they never forget it. I've never forgotten it. You're my son. And when you have belonging from a parent like Jesus had, that relationship, if it's warm and open, Satan has such a tough time dislodging these things from a child's heart. You're my son. And we will walk through the issues together. And I'm pleased for the last 30 some odd years, you have done great. I want you to know heaven smiles on the life that you're living. And his baptism was about that. To let him know he's on target to his mission. God communicated belonging. A father communicates belonging. Secondly, God communicated value. He says, whom I love. Jesus could live with confidence, knowing that God his Father loved him. Many sons have never heard an I love you from dad. I'm proud of you, son. They've never heard that. And it's amazing how many sons will say, I just feel distant from my dad. I don't feel close to it. And Reba McEntire sings that song about the greatest man I never knew. I live with him. I watch him go to work. Watch him drink his Pepsi. Till the garden occasionally. But I just don't really feel like I ever connected. I don't really know him. And so many sons and daughters feel that way. And every son and daughter longs for this close, intimate connection with their dad.
And the third and final thing, of course, he communicated belonging and he communicated value. And the third thing here that dads really need to convey based on how even Jesus treated his son Jesus, he says, and he communicates approval. He says, with you I am well pleased. With you I'm well pleased. I watched a documentary on Lance Mackey not too long ago. Lance Mackey is the guy that races the Iditarod race in Alaska, 1,000+ miles, dog sled race. He won it like 4 years in a row, and that's probably going to stand for a long, long time. And he says, the interviewer asked him, really what's the driving force behind these races? What's the driving force that's driven you into sub-temperatures to win this race and to make this kind of your life calling? He says, I'm just trying to make my dad proud of me. When I was a little boy, my dad knew his mushing dogs. He also mushed dogs and sled dogs and things. And he said my dad knew dogs, or his dad actually said, I knew my dogs better. I knew the personality and quirks of my sled dogs better than I knew my son. And it took Lance Mackey 20-some years to process all that. His life spiraled down. He got into drugs and alcohol, a lot of things. And he decided he wanted to try to make his dad proud of him. And then that desire has literally driven him through all kinds of sub-zero temperatures. Just to say, and to hear those words, you're mine, I approve of your life, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of who you are. So going into the wilderness, Jesus could say, this is who I am. This is what I do. And this is where I'm going. I will stand between people in the kingdom of darkness. And that's kind of the way it is sometimes, what dads do. We go into, there's a starting line, dads, there's a finish line. There's a lot of rough patches in between. But the family needs you to be that person that will rise up and lead your family and love your family. I'm going to give, not everybody will feel called to do this today. Mike will get the microphone for me. And we're doing okay this morning, so we're going to have a little time for this. All right? And if you feel like maybe you just stand up where you are, tell us who you are. If you want to tell us, introduce your son or daughter and tell us why you love them, kind of abbreviated form. We can't do it a long time, and maybe you just they're here and you want to talk to them in the company of others. And then one other thing I'm going to give you to do today, and that is that after this is all said and done, okay, one of the questions that I asked my kids one time, and I've never forgotten it. This is the question I ask. And so after this is all done today, after we are dismissed and you go your way and you have a little time to think about what's happened, ask this question. What would you like to say to me? Ask it of your son or daughter. What would you like to say to me if I guaranteed you I wouldn't get angry or defensive? Huh? And boy, you'll get an earful. But you have to make sure they believe you about not getting angry and not getting defensive part. Because if they don't believe you there, they're still going to hold back. And I still remember that conversations with our kids. And they taught me a lot then, and I was able to modify some things to get on track for that. So here we are. Here you are. Who would like to go first?